These women are obsessed with him. Like, they're so focused on this guy. Why? What's up everyone, my name is Kelsey. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing another wrap up. This is about all the books I read in September. Sorry about my voice. I've had a cold for like a week now. Feels like 2 weeks, feels like my whole life. Second, I am supposed to be leaving for somewhere in oh shit, like 20 minutes. So we're gonna try and one take this. Very little editing because I tend to talk a lot and I just don't have time today. So in September, I read a total of, didn't write it down, 13 books, 4 YA, 9 adult, 1 1 star, 2 2 stars, 3 3 stars, 6 4 stars, only 1 5 star. That's kind of sad. Genres: 1 thriller, 1 contemporary romance, like YA romance, 7 sci-fi, 1 literary fiction, 1 fantasy, and 2 straight up romance. I DNF'd 3 books this month. So briefly, We Contain Multitudes by Sarah Henstra. I started listening to this on audiobook because it was available at my library, and it's like a young adult coming of age with like a romance about 2 boys, and I just wasn't liking it at all. I think mostly because the format is just letters between these 2 students, and one of these students is obsessed with this poet. What's his name? Walt Whitman. I hate Walt Whitman's poetry. It's too much for me. It's just not my style. He kept quoting lines from his poems and I just like didn't care at all. So I DNF'd that. Then Bone Diggers by Rose Sinclair. I kept seeing this book pop up because it has an ace protagonist, I think, but once I got into the story and it's about this sort of future world where there's a VR gaming thing that's fully immersive, and it's like kind of about what's happening in both of those worlds, and I'm just not interested in that. And then Freshwater by Akwaeke and Emezi. I looked this up, so hopefully that's right. And this is like a literary fiction. I didn't get far into it. The writing style was it's not even the writing style, it's just the narrative style, really, where it's sort of like bridging this gap between the fantastical and contemporary real life, and I just not into it. First book I actually finished, Temper by Layne Fargo. This is an adult thriller. I own this one. It's about 2 main characters. One of them, Kira, has just gotten a role in a stage play, like a small stage play in an indie theater with this director that she's loved for a long time, but has a reputation for being really temperamental and hard to work with. And our other prospective character is Joanna, who is Malcolm's assistant and like on again, off again lover. So pros for this book is that there's a shit ton of bi people. I'm into that. Malcolm is bi, Kira's best friend Jake is bi, and Joanna is bi, so that's cool. I loved the premise, like the theater scene, and the setup for that was really interesting because it's such a small play. It's like a 2-person play where there are only 2 actors. One of them is Malcolm and one of them is Kira. So it sets you up for a lot of tension, and because all of the characters are interacting with only each other so much, you get to see a lot of that. I also liked how it went into so much of all of the main characters' backstories, and the ending was like crazy. Did not see it coming. Like I was at the end of the book like, what the fuck just happened? My cons for this book are that I didn't really feel any building tension at all. It was like very, very one note throughout the whole thing. Like I could tell what the author was trying to do in building tension between some of the characters and trying to explore one of the characters' like inner emotions. It just wasn't translating well. Like I didn't feel it. Also, I read a decent amount of thrillers, and so many of them are based on people being obsessed with a dude for reasons I don't understand. Like this love interest is not compelling in my opinion. Like I just don't understand why these women are obsessed with him. Like they're so focused on this guy. Why? So I ended up giving this 3 stars, which is kind of disappointing because this was a really anticipated read for me, but it was still good. Like, I can't say I had a bad time reading it. Next, Tell Me How You Really Feel by Aminah Safi. This is a young adult contemporary with romantic elements, but also kind of coming of age. I got this from the library. It follows Rachel and Sana. I know this is a retelling of some kind of Shakespeare play, but I don't really know Shakespeare, so I can't give you details on that. But it follows Rachel and Sana. Rachel is a filmmaker in high school, and she's working on like a final capstone project in order to apply for theater schools. Sana is a high achieving student that's supposed to go to med school, but she's not sure if she wants to do that. And this picks up in like an enemies to lovers kind of thing, because a few years ago Sana asked Rachel out on a date and Rachel thought she was just fucking with her to be mean. Sana is like a popular girl, and in Rachel's mind that means she's going to be mean to her. Pros for this book: it's very gay. It's also super fluffy, and like, you know, if you just want a young adult book with like some internal struggle but ultimately happy ending, this is good for you. I especially enjoyed Sana's portion of like her struggles with her family and their expectations for her. I also enjoyed that neither of these girls had like a big struggle with being gay. Like, it was just, they just were, and for the most part their families were accepting, so I like that. And my cons for this book are that is like a whole bunch of miscommunication trope. So if you're a miscommunication hater, you probably won't enjoy this. And also, like, there were a lot of Gilmore Girls inspired setups in here. Like, there were some things that were happening that I'm like, this is exactly a plot from Gilmore Girls. Like, I can picture the episode, which I guess is both a pro and a con. It was kind of fun, but also not very original. I ended up giving this 4 stars just because I just had a good time reading it. Next is The Fever King by Victoria Lee. I read this as an ebook. It's a young adult sci-fi dystopian that's set in like a near future where some sort of disease infects people and mostly kills people, but the people that do survive come back with like these magical but science-based abilities. So it follows our main character Gnome, whose area of the city is infected with this disease, and he is one of very few to survive, and he has these abilities and is recruited to this like government agency that's sort of like a law enforcement type deal. Pros for this book are that the world building is super interesting, and all of the powers and abilities and their basis for how they work is so interesting. Like, everything has a backing in science. It's not just magic. So I really loved that. All of the characters had like really complex motivations and backstories, and you're sort of peeling back layers a little bit at a time, not only for the main character Gnome, but also for side characters. Dara is the love interest. Oh, also pro is that Gnome is bisexual, so that's cool. Dara is also not straight. I don't know if he's gay or bi. Hasn't gone into that. The way everything plays out at the end of book 1, there's a great setup for like a more complex political plot in book 2. The romance is like very, very slow burn if you're into that. Victoria also doesn't shy away from like putting her characters into really terrible positions and situations where they have to make really hard decisions. I also loved how she worked in like really modern problems of poverty in like real life today into this new world. It was just really well done. Like, just a really great book. I gave it 4 stars just because I'm not super invested. I'm definitely gonna read book 2. I just didn't love it. Like, I didn't have that emotional attachment, if that makes sense. Next, Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. I let someone borrow this book, but I do own a physical copy. This is an adult, I mean, it's pitched as literary fiction, but it's also at its core a mystery. It's set in the 60s and 70s, and Kia has always grown up in the marsh, like a very wild area of this city where she lives. So she's pretty isolated. And when she's a child, her family slowly starts leaving her. All of her siblings are older and they want to get out of the house. Her father is abusive, so her mother leaves. And then eventually her father just leaves and never comes back. So when she's a young teen, she's left on her own to raise herself and survive in the marsh without a way to make money. And we're sort of following 2 timelines. So one when Kia is young and showing how she's growing up, and one in the future where a man has been murdered and she is on trial for the murder. I ended up really liking this book. I read it for a book club and I wasn't expecting to love it, mostly because all of the reviews and descriptions and like the blurbs on the book sounded so pretentious. But once you get into the book and you realize it's just a murder mystery at its core, I was pretty invested. And my pros for this book are that Kia's character is amazing. Like, the way the author shows her growing up in this marsh and the struggle she has to deal with in raising herself, and her emotional reaction to being abandoned basically by her entire family is just so interesting and so well done. I also think the way she interacted with the outside world was super realistic, and her resistance to social activities and things like that. And there's like this weird dynamic of her being super naive but also being very cynical because of what happened to her as a child. My cons for this book are that there was a lot of purple prose. Like, there's a lot of similes for things that are happening in the marsh and how her house sits in the marsh, and like at some points I'm just like, okay, I get it, it's beautiful but sad, just too much. And then when Kia is 14, she starts a relationship with a boy and he is 18, and that just really skeeved me out, especially considering how unsocialized Kia was. Like, just a strange way to set up the relationship. And when it was happening, I thought maybe the author was trying to convince us that this relationship was unhealthy, but as the book went on, it didn't seem that way. So I'm curious what other people thought about that age thing. Like, I feel like I was the only person that noticed at book club, and it just really weirded me out. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. Next is Dawn by Octavia Butler. This is an adult sci-fi. I read a physical copy from my library. This is about a woman who like wakes up on a spaceship after Earth has basically been destroyed by war, and these aliens tell her that they are cultivating what is basically a new species in order to send them back to Earth and rehabilitate it. And that's pretty much the whole plot. Like, my pros with this book are that the main character's reactions seemed very realistic. She like was angry, very angry at the situation she was in. She was also sad because while there are other humans on this ship, it's no one she knows. It's not her family. It's not her friends. Like, she feels very lonely. The social structure of the aliens was super fleshed out, and the aliens themselves were like super creepy and seemed very well developed. Like, the way they interacted with each other and the way their ship and just their inner selves, their inner workings, the way they thought, just all made sense. And my cons for this book are that it was just kind of boring. It felt very one note through the whole book. There wasn't a lot of, I didn't feel a lot of rising and falling tension. Eventually more human characters are introduced and they're just not very well fleshed out. I mean, the book is very short, so there's just not a lot of time to do that, but I feel like it needed it. Especially at the end of the book, there's like a climactic point, and at that point I was still mixing up characters. I didn't know who was who because I didn't have enough of a personality behind the name. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. Next was The Light Brigade by Kameron Hurley. This is an adult sci-fi, and I listened to the audiobook. We follow main character Dietz, and this is set in another futuristic world where corporations have basically become the government. There's sort of a caste system where there are, I think they called them grunts, and then there are residents who have some rights and citizens who have full rights under the corporations. And one of the paths to citizenship is to join the military, so that's what Dietz does. And they have this sort of technology where they basically turn people into light to have them travel long distances, and some of Dietz's jumps, they call them, go bad. So throughout this book, you're seeing her jumps, and you're basically jumping around her personal timeline throughout the book. So her first jump, she comes back and she's like hundreds of days into the future, and you're sort of figuring out why and what happened, and also like the overarching plot of what these corporations are doing and what this war is really about. Pros for this book is that it's queer. I mean, here's the thing. I listened to the audiobook, and it wasn't until I read some of the reviews that the gender of the main character is supposed to be a mystery. Like, in the book, it sounds like a woman's voice, so I just assumed it was a woman. But in the physical book, no one ever uses pronouns around Dietz. No one mentions, I mean, there's some sex in the book, but no one mentions genitals specifically concerning either partner. So there was just, like, it was supposed to be a mystery, and I feel like that might have made it a little more compelling. There was some good character development for Dietz, like in the way she interacted with her surroundings and the way she viewed this caste system. And then there's sections of the book that are an interview with her captor, and those parts were really interesting. My cons for this book are that it was really, really confusing. And because there's so little given to you throughout the book, there's nothing to hold on to even try to put together a theory. And because we're jumping around in her timeline and we're meeting different characters at different times and interacting with them in strange ways, you don't really get to know any of the other characters because their character development is all out of order. It was also really political, and I'm not super into that. And I also felt like the conclusion was really rushed. Like, we got to the end event and everything was explained, and then it was over, and I'm like, wait, what? What happened exactly? So I ended up giving this 2 stars, which is super disappointing because I love queer sci-fi, and it's just, it's just sad. And now I have to go to this thing. I did not speak nearly fast enough. I'm only on book 6. Shit. So I'm gonna have to finish filming this later. Okay, I'm back. I don't actually know if I said where I was going earlier, but I went to Cedar Point, so my hair's probably a fucking mess because I was on roller coasters all day. But this has to get done today, so here we are. Hopefully, I just talked about The Light Brigade. So book 7 is Artificial Condition by Martha Wells. This is an adult sci-fi novella, and it's the second book in the Murderbot Diaries. I read this as an ebook. I'll tell you about the first book since the second book is a continuation, but it's about this security unit that has hacked his governor module, and because of that has gained kind of his own free will, and like an exploration team on a mission with Murderbot as their security unit, and shit starts to go wrong. And the only reason that Murderbot isn't affected by some of the bad things that are happening is because he's not controlled by his governor module, so he kind of has to reveal himself to this group of humans in order to save their lives. So I highly recommend this series. Murderbot is like so relatable somehow. Like throughout this whole book, I kept screenshotting little captions where he's just so funny, and it's like he doesn't really want to be doing anything, but he feels like he has to. Like so much of the time he's just like, I wish I was alone watching my soap operas. And that's just like so relatable. I gave this 5 stars, of course, and I'll definitely be continuing the series. Book 8 is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is another adult sci-fi, and this is a physical library copy. If you read any sci-fi, you've probably heard of this book. It follows like a group of people on a ship called the Wayfarer, and the Wayfarer is responsible for anchoring. What do? They basically create anchors for long distance travel through space via black holes. So like that's their job. That's what the crew does. They get this job that requires them to be on ship for more than a year at once, which is an especially long job, and it just follows this group of 6 characters. It's a very character-driven story. The plot really is just everything I just told you. They're on the ship for a year to get to this other location. That's pretty much all that happens plot-wise. Pros for this book are that the world is crazy well developed. Like there are so many different species both on this ship and in this world, and all of their different social structures are so well thought out, and the way they play off each other is just so interesting. The way the characters interact with each other is really interesting, and just everything about it is so convincing. Like everything feels so real, all of the characters feel real. Like while you're reading this book, it's almost like you're convinced that obviously these are real things that are happening in the universe right now, just because everything is so perfectly planned. I also found like during this book, and one of my cons for this book is that it was kind of like I was bored because it's so character driven and pretty much nothing is happening, but I got really attached to the characters, and it like wasn't until the end when things actually start happening and like some of the characters are potentially in danger that I'm like very afraid for them, and it's like I didn't even notice myself getting attached to them. But at the end I was like, oh my god, I couldn't handle it if something bad happened. My other con is that it's just really long for that kind of book. This is 437 pages, this paperback, and it was just a lot. Like getting through it was kind of a struggle. So 3 stars for that one. Book 9 was Overexposed by Megan Erickson. This is an adult romance. I read this as an ebook. It's about, are the characters' names? I didn't write them down and I don't remember them. So our prospective main character has recently lost his sister and has decided to go on this long hike, I think the Appalachian, that they were going to do together. He decides to do it alone as like part of his grieving process, and along this trail he meets another man and it's a romance. My pros for this book are that one of the main characters is demisexual, and there's like on-page representation and they talk about it in the book. And literally that's why I read this book, because I am desperate for and always looking for straight up romance books with any kind of a spec rep. So this one popped up a few times and I decided to give it a chance. My other pro is that, there's pretty good discussions of like grief and loss from the main character's perspective, because his sister passed recently and he talks about it with the love interest and he thinks about it in his own mind, and there are pretty healthy portrayals, I feel. My cons for this book there are a lot, and the characters are flat and boring. There's no chemistry between the 2 leads. Something that really stood out to me and bothered me is that the main character's inner monologue, his voice is so different than how he acts outwardly, and it was like such a difference that every time he spoke to another person I was like, whoa, who the fuck is this? Because it just didn't make any sense with how he was thinking to himself. The love interest is very, like, his character is that he is very standoffish, he doesn't speak much, and he's like kind of a loner, and I didn't think there was enough interaction between the 2 characters for the main character to have such a strong attachment to him. And my last con for this book is that there are like so many sex scenes. It's like a third of the book is sex scenes, and I just didn't get it. Like, there was no chemistry between the characters, so the sex scenes weren't exactly compelling, and they didn't add anything to the relationship between the two characters. They weren't particularly sexy, and they didn't... I mean, there's a place for smut, of course, but in a romance book that is trying so hard to be emotional, I expect the sex scenes to have some sort of emotional or romantic moments, and they just didn't. Like, I don't know, it's just weird. I gave it 2 stars because it wasn't like actively offensive, it just wasn't very good. I'm out of breath because I can barely breathe through my nose, so I need a minute. This is so embarrassing. Okay, book 10, Gemina by J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufmen. This is book 2 in the Illuminae files. I'm sure you've heard of these. I own this physical copy. It's book 2, but it follows different characters in a different ship, so I don't really think there are spoilers if I tell you anything about the plot. So this one follows Hannah, who is the daughter of the ship's captain, I guess, the head guy, most in charge guy, and Nick, who is like a criminal. He's basically part of some sort of mafia adjacent, you know, type deal. And the station is infiltrated by shady bad guys. We'll just go there. So Hannah and Nick are outside of the rooms where they have quarantined most of the passengers, and they kind of team up to figure out why these people are here and how to save the ship from these people, basically. Pros for this book are that it was really exciting. I only gave Illuminae 3 out of 5 stars because I thought it was mostly boring and I thought it was way too long. But, and part of that might have been because I listened to the audiobook. I heard it was good, but the format of this was way more interesting to read than it was to listen to, because, you know, it's all told in like instant messages, emails, recaps of video footage, stuff like that. I really enjoyed these characters more than the ones in Illuminae, and that's not to say the Illuminae characters were bad. I just wasn't really attached to them, and I got really attached to Hannah and Nick. I also thought, like, at the end of the book we get to sort of this plot twist that I didn't see coming and was super interested in and fascinated by like the science behind it. It was just like so intense, like my heart was pounding. I just couldn't wait to figure out what was going to happen next. So I ended up giving this 4 stars, really enjoyed it, and I will definitely read the next one. Book 11, Tarnished Are the Stars by Rosiee Thor. I own this physical copy. I actually won this. This is an advanced copy. This book doesn't come out until October 15th. What's today? The 6th. So a little more than a week and this book comes out. It's a young adult sci-fi following 3 main characters, 3 perspective characters. I guess I should tell you the setting first. So this is set in a distant future where humans have settled on a new planet, but there's sort of like an experimental settlement to figure out if humanity can survive on this planet. But then there's a group of people who, because of some of the laws restricting technology in the settlement, have left the settlement and moved into hiding so that they can use technology to basically survive. So we follow Anna, who is one of these people that lives out of the settlement because she has what they call a clockwork heart. So basically these are people with medical problems that require technology to repair, mechanical technology really. And Anna is the technician. So she is like a black market medical dealer, and her grandfather help people who need technology help. We also follow Nathaniel, who is the son of the commissioner of this new settlement, and the commissioner is the one who makes all of these rules against technology. So Nathaniel is desperate to please his father and thinks that if he catches the technician, he'll finally get his approval. And then last we follow Eliza, who is the eyes of the queen. And the queen is still on this ship. She does not live on planet. And Eliza has been training her whole life to sort of be this spy for the queen, her right-hand man, so to speak. And she is betrothed to Nathan. So she is sent to Earth to spy on Nathan and the commissioner and do some secret mission for the queen. Pros with this book. First, I'm going to talk about the rep because Nathaniel is asexual and aromantic. It's discussed on page. It's amazing. There's a conversation between him and Eliza, I believe. That's just so perfect. I loved it so much. And then Eliza and Anna are also love interests for each other. So there's a female-female relationship. There's casual queerness throughout the whole book. More pros are I love the family dynamics between the characters in these books. So Anna and her grandfather Thatcher. There's Anna and her best friend and her best friend's son. Their relationships are all so interesting and they're relevant throughout the whole book. I feel like so many times in young adult fantasy especially, this is more sci-fi, but the friends the regular normal people friends who aren't on like super secret special missions kind of get forgotten about, and that doesn't happen in this book. There's also great discussions of like guilt, survivor's guilt, and grief. There's some great themes of like medical ethics, which you don't see a lot of in young adult sci-fi. My cons for this book are that I didn't love the world building. This is I keep saying sci-fi, but this is a sci-fi, but it really leans toward like the steampunk side of things, and I just don't usually read steampunk, and I feel like if I had had a basis in that, I would have caught on more quickly to the world, but because I don't, I was very confused by whenever they said tech, what they meant by that, because when I think tech, I think like cell phones and computers, and when they say tech in this book, they're really referring to mechanics, and I just found it very confusing at the beginning of the book. My other con is I wish it were longer. Let's see, there's 369 pages. That's a pretty good length for a young adult book, but I feel like I wanted more from the female-female romance, and I would have read more of that. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. I do recommend it. Okay, book 12, The Monster of Elendhaven by Jennifer Geisbrecht. This is an adult fantasy horror. Obviously, this is a physical copy from my library. It follows a monster, Johan, who was born out of tragedy basically and can't die. And then we have Florian, who is sort of like a high society member, the only surviving member of his family after a plague killed everyone else. And the two kind of team up to get revenge. And it's sort of like a twisted, fucked up love story / revenge story. Pros for this book are that it is like, I mean, it's a very twisted romance, but like super compelling, and it's violent and gory, but also somehow charming. The writing is so charming, and it feels very like dark fairy tale. My only cons are that, like with all novellas, most novellas, I guess, I wanted more. Like, if this could have been a full-length book, I would have devoured it. I ended up giving it 4 stars, but I think I might bump it up to 5, just because my only con is that I didn't think it was long enough. I might change this to a 5. We'll see. All right, my last book, Lawless by Diana Palmer. I read this book for a separate video, so I'm going to link that in the cards and be very brief here, because if you're interested, you can watch that whole video. This is an adult romance, an adult Western romance, and it follows, I really don't even want to talk about because I hated it so much. Suffice it to say, this is cliche and sexist and misogynistic, and the love interest is god-awful. It's like the worst of romance tropes, and it felt very early 2000s, lots of shaming of women, lots of not like other girls, lots of just bad all around. This is a 1-star book. I really hated it. That's a terrible way to end the month, but it is what it is. All right, that's everything I read in, what month was it? September. If you read any of these, please let me know. If you have any recommendations for me from September, I'd love to hear them. I post book-related videos every Wednesday, so subscribe if you want to see more. If you like this video, hit like. If you want to keep talking, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Kelsey Reads or Goodreads at Kelsey Lynn Reads. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.